Marcus Chen stepped off the airplane at London Heathrow Airport with a big smile on his face. He was 28 years old and very proud of himself. The black belt around his waist and his luggage meant everything to him. It was not just any black belt. It was a third-degree black belt in Taekwondo. Back home in California, everyone knew his name. He had won many tournaments and had many trophies on his shelf at home. The flight from Los Angeles had been long, but Marcus did not feel tired. He was too excited about being in London. This was his first trip to England, and he was here for something very important. The International Martial Arts Federation had invited him to take part in a big demonstration. Fighters from all over the world would be there. Marcus knew this was his chance to show everyone how good he was. As he walked through the busy airport, Marcus looked at himself in the reflection of the windows. He was tall and strong. His black hair was cut short and neat. He wore expensive clothes and walked with confidence. Other people at the airport looked at him as he passed by. Marcus liked the attention. He had always liked it when people noticed. Marcus had been doing martial arts since he was 7 years old. His father had taken him to the local dojo after Marcus got into a fight at school. The teacher there was strict but kind. He taught Marcus about discipline and respect, but somewhere along the way Marcus had forgotten those early lessons. The more he won, the more he thought he was better than everyone else. In his hometown, Marcus ran his own martial arts school. He had about 50 students who looked up to him. They thought he was amazing. Marcus liked being their hero. He liked when they cheered for him during demonstrations. He especially liked when new students came to watch and were impressed by his skills. But Marcus had a problem. He thought winning tournaments made him a real fighter. He thought his trophies meant he could beat anyone in a real fight. He did not understand the difference between sport fighting and real combat. In tournaments there were rules. There were referees. There were time limits. In the real world, there were no such things. After getting his luggage, Marcus took a taxi to his hotel in central London. The driver was friendly and asked him why he was visiting. Marcus was happy to talk about himself. He told the driver all about his martial arts achievements. He showed pictures on his phone of his latest tournament victory. The driver nodded politely, but Marcus could not tell if he was really interested or just being nice. The hotel was nice and located near many famous places in London. Marcus checked in and went to his room on the 5th floor. It had a good view of the busy street below. He unpacked his clothes and hung up his competition uniform carefully. Tomorrow was the demonstration, but today he wanted to see some of the famous sights of London. Marcus had heard about Buckingham Palace his whole life. Every American knew about the Queen and the royal family. He had seen pictures of the palace and the guards in their red uniforms and tall black hats. Now he would finally see them in person. He grabbed his phone and made sure it was fully charged. He wanted to take lots of pictures and videos to show his friends back home. The taxi ride to Buckingham Palace took about 20 minutes. Marcus sat in the back seat and looked out the window at all the old buildings and busy streets. London was very different from his home in California. Everything seemed older and more formal here, but Marcus did not feel nervous or out of place. He felt like he belonged anywhere. After all, he was a champion. When the taxi stopped in front of the palace, Marcus was impressed despite himself. The building was huge and beautiful. The golden gates were decorated with detailed designs. Tourists from all over the world were taking pictures and talking in many different languages. Marcus paid the taxi driver and joined the crowd. The palace was everything he had expected and more. The stone walls looked ancient and important. The windows were large and perfectly clean. British flags flew from tall poles in the wind. Marcus took out his phone and started taking pictures of everything. He wanted to document his visit completely, but what caught his attention most were the guards. They stood perfectly still in their bright red uniforms and tall black hats called bearskins. Their boots were shiny black leather. They held long rifles with sharp bayonets on the end. Their faces showed no emotion at all. They looked straight ahead and did not move even when tourists took pictures right in front of them. Marcus had heard about these guards before, but seeing them in person was different. Other tourists seemed impressed by their discipline. Children pointed at them and whispered to their parents. Some people tried to make the guards laugh or smile, but the guards never reacted. They stood like statues. Marcus watched them for a while and started to have different thoughts than the other tourists. Where others saw discipline and training, Marcus saw weakness. Where others saw professional soldiers, Marcus saw men playing dress-up. Where others saw impressive control, Marcus saw people who could not defend themselves if they needed to. He began to think about his own training. Marcus could kick higher than his own head. He could break wooden boards with his bare hands. He could move faster than most people could see. These guards just stood there doing nothing. How hard could that be? Anyone could stand still and look serious. Marcus started to feel superior to the guards. In his mind, real fighting ability was about moving fast, hitting hard, and winning competitions. These men were just for show. They were like actors in a play. They looked impressive to tourists who did not know anything about real fighting, but Marcus knew better. As he walked around the palace gates, Marcus began to notice how the guards never moved or reacted to anything. People took pictures with them. Children made faces at them. Some teenagers even tried to distract them with loud noises. But the guards remained perfectly still and professional. This made Marcus think even less of them. In his world, if someone disrespected you, you had to respond. If someone challenged you, you had to prove yourself. These guards did nothing. To Marcus, this looked like cowardice. He did not understand that it actually took great discipline and training to ignore distractions and stay focused on duty. The sun was getting lower in the sky, and more tourists were gathering around the palace. Marcus realized he had been watching the guards for over an hour. Tomorrow he would need to prepare for his demonstration, but right now he could not stop thinking about these men in red uniforms. An idea was beginning to form in his mind. It was not a good idea, but Marcus did not realize that yet. Marcus woke up early the next morning feeling excited and confident. He had slept well in his comfortable hotel room, and today was going to be special. But not for the reasons he originally planned. The martial arts demonstration was still important, but something else was on his mind. He kept thinking about those guards at Buckingham Palace. After eating breakfast at the hotel restaurant, Marcus decided to visit the palace again before his afternoon demonstration. He told himself he just wanted to take more pictures, but deep down, he knew he had other reasons. The way those guards had just stood there yesterday bothered him. It did not seem right to him that people were so impressed by men who did nothing but stand still. Marcus dressed carefully that morning. He wore his best casual clothes and made sure his hair looked perfect. He wanted to look good for the pictures he planned to take. He also wore his favorite shoes, the ones that were good for quick movements. He did not think too much about why he chose those particular shoes. The taxi ride to the palace seemed shorter today. Marcus felt more familiar with London now. He was not just another tourist anymore. He was someone important, someone who understood fighting and strength. When he arrived at the palace, there were even more people there than yesterday. Tour groups moved around taking pictures. Children ran between their parents' legs. Everyone seemed excited to be there. But Marcus was not looking at the other tourists. His eyes went straight to the guards. They were in the same positions as yesterday, wearing the same red uniforms and tall black hats. They held their rifles in exactly the same way. Their faces showed no expression at all. To most people, they looked impressive and professional. To Marcus, they looked like easy targets. Marcus started walking closer to the guards than he had yesterday. He wanted to get a better look at them. As he got nearer, he could see that they were all young men, probably in their 20s like him. Some were tall, some were shorter. Some looked very strong, others looked more average. But they all had the same serious expression and perfect posture. One guard in particular caught Marcus's attention. This man was about the same height as Marcus and looked to be about the same age. He had short brown hair under his tall hat and a strong jaw. His uniform was perfect without even the smallest wrinkle. His boots were so shiny that Marcus could see his own reflection in them. This guard stood at the main gate where most tourists gathered. Marcus took out his phone and started taking pictures of this guard from different angles. At first, he was just taking normal tourist photos. But then he started to get ideas. He began taking pictures of himself standing next to the guard. He made strong poses, showing his muscles and athletic build. In the pictures, it looked like Marcus was much more impressive than the guard. But taking pictures was not enough for Marcus. He wanted to show people that these guards were not as special as everyone thought. He started making comments out loud, speaking loudly enough for other tourists to hear. "Look at this guy," Marcus said, pointing at the guard. "He just stands there all day. That's not real training. Real training means you can actually fight." Some tourists looked at Marcus strangely, but he did not care. He was just getting started. Marcus began demonstrating some of his martial arts moves near the guard. He threw punches in the air, showing his speed and technique. He did high kicks, lifting his leg above his head. He moved in the fighting stances he had learned over many years of training. Other tourists stopped to watch him, which made Marcus feel good. "See that?" Marcus said loudly. "That's what real fighting looks like. These guards don't know anything about real combat. They're just for decoration, like statues." The guard did not react at all. He continued staring straight ahead, as if Marcus was not even there. This made Marcus feel even more superior. In his mind, the guard's lack of response proved that he was weak and could not handle a real challenge. Marcus started recording videos on his phone while he talked. He wanted to post these videos online later to show his friends and students back home. He held the phone at arm's length and spoke directly to the camera. "I'm here at Buckingham Palace in London," he said into the phone. "And I have to tell you, these famous guards everyone talks about are really not impressive at all. Look at this guy behind me. He's supposed to be some kind of elite soldier, but he can't even react when someone challenges him." Marcus turned the phone around to show the guard, then turned it back to himself. "I've been doing martial arts for over 20 years, he continued. "I'm a third-degree black belt, and I've won more tournaments than I can count. But these guys, they just stand around in fancy costumes. I bet none of them could last 5 minutes in a real fight." The crowd around Marcus was growing larger. Some people looked interested in what he was saying. Others looked uncomfortable or embarrassed for him. A few people were taking their own videos of Marcus making his speeches, but Marcus was too focused on himself to notice how others were really reacting. Marcus started getting bolder with his demonstrations. He moved closer to the guard and began showing fighting techniques right next to him. He threw punches that stopped just inches from the guard's body. He did kicks that came very close to the guard's legs. Each time the guard remained perfectly still. "You see?" Marcus said to his phone camera. No reaction at all. In a real fight, you have to be ready for anything. You have to be able to respond instantly. This guy wouldn't last a second against someone with real training. Marcus was starting to feel very excited. He felt like he was proving something important. All these tourists who had been impressed by these guards were now seeing the truth. Marcus was showing them what real strength and skill looked like. But Marcus did not understand several important things. He did not know that the guard he was bothering was named Sergeant James Morrison. He did not know that Sergeant Morrison had served 12 years in the British military, including 3 tours in Afghanistan. He did not know that before becoming a household cavalry guard, Sergeant Morrison had been a Royal Marines commando, one of the most elite fighting units in the world. Marcus also did not understand that the guard's lack of reaction was not weakness. It was incredible discipline. Sergeant Morrison had been trained to ignore all distractions while on duty. He had stood guard in much more dangerous places than London, where staying alert and focused could mean the difference between life and death. Most importantly, Marcus did not realize that his behavior was becoming more than just annoying. It was becoming disrespectful and potentially threatening. The other guards were starting to notice what was happening. Palace security cameras were recording everything. And Sergeant Morrison, despite his perfect stillness, was very aware of everything Marcus was doing. As the morning continued, Marcus became more and more excited by his own performance. He felt like he was becoming famous right there at the palace gates. People were watching him, some were filming him, and he was getting to prove his point about real fighting versus ceremonial duty. But Marcus was making a serious mistake. He was confusing his ability to perform martial arts demonstrations with actual combat readiness. He was assuming that because these guards did not react to his show-off behavior, they could not handle themselves in a real situation. Most dangerously, he was starting to believe that he could do whatever he wanted without consequences. The stage was being set for something that would change Marcus's life forever. But at that moment, standing in the morning sun at Buckingham Palace, surrounded by impressed tourists and recording videos for social media, Marcus felt like he was on top of the world. He had no idea how wrong he was about everything. The crowd around Marcus was getting bigger by the minute. Word was spreading among the tourists that something interesting was happening at the palace gates. People were pulling out their phones and cameras. Some were live streaming the scene on social media. Marcus loved every second of the attention he was getting. Marcus had been performing his martial arts demonstrations for almost an hour now. His clothes were starting to get a little sweaty from all the movement, but he felt energized by the audience. Every time someone took a picture or recording of him, he felt more important. This was better than any tournament he had ever won. The guard, Sergeant Morrison, continued to stand perfectly still. His face showed no emotion. His eyes stared straight ahead. His hands gripped his rifle in exactly the correct position. To Marcus, this only proved his point more. Here was a man who was supposed to be protecting the royal family, but he could not even respond to a simple challenge. Marcus decided it was time to make his point even clearer. He stopped his demonstrations and walked directly in front of the guard. He looked up at the man's face, which was partially hidden under the shadow of the tall black hat. "Hey there, soldier," Marcus said loudly, making sure his voice carried to the crowd. "I'm talking to you. Can you hear me in there?" The guard did not respond. His eyes continued looking straight ahead, as if Marcus was invisible. Marcus turned to face the crowd of tourists, keeping his phone camera recording. "You see this, everyone? This is what they call an elite guard. But look, he can't even acknowledge when someone is talking to him. How is he supposed to protect anything if he can't even communicate?" Some people in the crowd laughed. Others looked uncomfortable. A few parents started pulling their children away, sensing that something was not right about the situation. But many people stayed to watch, curious about what would happen next. Marcus felt encouraged by the laughter and attention. He turned back to the guard and spoke even louder. "I'm a real fighter," he announced. "I've spent my whole life learning how to defend myself and others. I've won competitions all over California. I run my own martial arts school where I teach people real combat skills, but you're just playing dress-up." The guard remained motionless. Marcus started pacing back and forth in front of the guard, like a lawyer in a courtroom making his case. He gestured dramatically as he spoke, making sure his voice was loud enough for everyone to hear. "People come from all over the world to see you guys," he continued. "They think you're so impressive with your fancy uniforms and your serious faces. But I know the truth. You're not real warriors. You're just actors putting on a show." Marcus stopped pacing and stood directly in front of the guard again. He was close enough now that he could see the man's breathing, though everything else about the guard remained perfectly still. "I challenge you," Marcus said clearly, looking directly at the guard's face. "I challenge you to step out of that little box you're standing in and face someone with actual fighting skills. Show these people what you're really made of." The crowd grew quieter. People sensed that something serious was happening now. This was no longer just a tourist taking pictures and making jokes. This was becoming a direct confrontation. But Sergeant Morrison did not move. His training had taught him to ignore all distractions while on duty. He had dealt with difficult tourists before, though none quite like Marcus. His job was to remain at his post and maintain the dignity of his position, no matter what happened around him. Marcus interpreted the guard's continued silence as fear. In his mind, a real fighter would have responded to such a direct challenge. The fact that this guard was doing nothing proved that he was not a real warrior. "Come on," Marcus taunted, moving even closer to the guard. "Don't you have anything to say? Are you afraid to face someone who actually knows how to fight?" Marcus began demonstrating more aggressive martial arts moves right in front of the guard. He threw punches that stopped just inches from the guard's chest. He did kicks that came dangerously close to the guard's legs. Each movement was fast and precise, showing his years of training. "Look at this technique," Marcus said to the crowd and his camera. 20 years of training. Speed, power, accuracy. This guard has probably never seen moves like this in his life. Some tourists were genuinely impressed by Marcus's martial arts skills. His movements were smooth and controlled. His kicks were high and fast. His punches were sharp and quick. It was clear that he had spent many years perfecting his techniques. But Marcus was making a dangerous assumption. He thought that because the guard was not reacting to his demonstrations, it meant the guard was not capable of reacting. He believed that his flashy martial arts moves were more impressive than whatever training the guard might have had. Marcus did not know that Sergeant Morrison was watching every move he made. The guard's eyes might have been looking straight ahead, but his peripheral vision was excellent. His military training had taught him to be aware of everything happening around him while maintaining his position. He could see every punch Marcus threw and every kick he attempted. More importantly, Sergeant Morrison was trained in real combat, not tournament fighting. His experience came from actual dangerous situations where lives were at stake. He knew the difference between flashy demonstrations and practical fighting techniques. He could see that Marcus's moves, while impressive to watch, were designed for sport competition, not real conflict. Marcus continued his taunting, growing bolder. With each passing minute, "I bet you've never been in a real fight in your life," he said loudly. "Standing here all day looking pretty is not the same as real combat training. In my world, you have to prove yourself every day. You have to earn respect through skill and victory." The crowd was getting larger and more restless. Some people were starting to call out for Marcus to stop. A few tourists were looking around for security guards or police officers. The situation was clearly escalating beyond normal tourist behavior, but Marcus was too caught up in his own performance to notice the changing mood of the crowd. He was feeling more confident than ever. In his mind, he was proving everything he had always believed about himself. He was showing the world the difference between real martial arts training and ceremonial military duty. "These uniforms don't make you tough," Marcus declared, gesturing at the guard's red jacket and tall hat. "Real toughness comes from years of hard training, from winning fights, from proving yourself against real opponents. You've never had to do any of that." Marcus was building up to something bigger. He could feel it himself. The crowd could sense it too. Even some of the other guards were starting to pay attention to what was happening, though they remained at their posts. Sergeant Morrison continued to stand perfectly still, but inside he was making calculations. He was assessing the situation, determining if and when he might need to take action. His training had taught him to be patient, but also to be ready for anything. Marcus raised his voice even more, making sure everyone could hear his final challenge. "So what do you say, soldier? Are you going to stand there like a statue forever, or are you going to prove that you're actually worthy of that uniform? I'm giving you a chance to show everyone that you're more than just decoration." The guards' silence in response to this direct challenge only made Marcus feel more superior. He was convinced that he had proven his point completely. These famous guards that everyone admired were nothing special at all. They were just ordinary men hiding behind fancy uniforms and ceremonial duties. But Marcus was about to learn that he had seriously misjudged the situation. His understanding of strength, training, and combat was about to be challenged in a way he had never experienced before. The man he was taunting was not the weak ceremonial figure Marcus believed him to be. Sergeant Morrison was a highly trained professional soldier with more real combat experience than Marcus could imagine, and Marcus was about to push him beyond the limits of his patience and duty. Marcus was feeling more powerful than he had ever felt in his life. The crowd around him had grown to more than 50 people. Phones and cameras were pointed at him from every direction. He could see people sharing videos on social media in real time. Some tourists were calling their friends to come see what was happening. Marcus felt like he was becoming famous right there on the spot. The guard still had not moved or spoken. To Marcus, this proved everything he had been saying. Here was supposed to be one of the most elite soldiers in the British military, but he could not even respond to a direct challenge. Marcus was convinced that his martial arts training made him superior to any of these ceremonial guards. Marcus decided to get even closer to the guard. He stepped forward until he was only about 2 feet away from Sergeant Morrison's face. At this distance, he could see the guard's eyes more clearly. They were blue and steady, looking straight ahead without blinking much. The guard's face was young but serious, with small lines around the eyes that suggested he had spent time in sunny, difficult places. But Marcus did not think about what those lines might mean. He did not consider that this guard might have real experience in dangerous situations. All Marcus saw was a man who would not fight back, and that made him feel even more confident. "Look at this, everyone," Marcus said to the crowd, holding up his phone to record himself with the guard in the background. "I'm standing right in front of this guy, challenging him directly, and he won't even look at me. This is what happens when people get their jobs because of ceremony instead of real skill." Marcus started doing more martial arts demonstrations, but now he was doing them extremely close to the guard. His punches stopped just an inch from the guard's chest. His kicks came within inches of the guard's legs. Each time, the guard remained perfectly still, which excited Marcus even more. "You see how close I can get?" Marcus said to his camera. "In a real fight, this guy would already be finished. Speed and surprise are everything in combat, and he has no defense against either one." The crowd was getting nervous. Many people could see that Marcus was crossing lines of appropriate behavior. Some parents had already taken their children away from the area. A few tourists were looking around for security guards or police officers to intervene. But Marcus was too focused on his performance to notice the changing mood around him. He was convinced that he was doing something important, showing the world the truth about these famous guards. In his mind, he was providing a valuable service by revealing that these men were not as impressive as people believed. Marcus began narrating his actions like a martial arts instructor teaching a class. "Notice how I can approach from any angle," he said, moving around the guard while maintaining the same close distance. "A real fighter needs to be ready for attacks from all directions, but this guard can't even turn his head to track my movement." What Marcus did not understand was that Sergeant Morrison was tracking his movement perfectly. The guard's training had taught him to use all his senses, not just his direct vision. He could hear exactly where Marcus was at every moment. He could sense the distance between them. He was completely aware of everything Marcus was doing. More importantly, Sergeant Morrison was trained to distinguish between actual threats and mere annoyances. Everything Marcus had done so far was inappropriate and disrespectful, but it was not technically threatening. The guard's duty was to remain at his post unless there was a real security concern. But Marcus was about to change that. Growing frustrated by the guard's complete lack of reaction, Marcus decided he needed to do something more dramatic. He wanted to get a response that would prove his point once and for all. He wanted to show the crowd and his camera that these guards were not prepared for real confrontation. Marcus moved directly in front of the guard again and began making exaggerated facial expressions, trying to get the guard to break his serious composure. He made funny faces, stuck out his tongue, and rolled his eyes. The crowd laughed at some of his antics, which encouraged him to continue. "Come on," Marcus taunted, speaking directly to the guard's face. "Give me something. Show me you're actually human in there. Or are you just a robot in a fancy costume?" Still no response from Sergeant Morrison. Marcus began waving his hands directly in front of the guard's face, trying to make him blink or flinch. He snapped his fingers loudly near the guard's ears. He made sudden movements designed to startle him. But the guard's training held firm. He continued staring straight ahead with the same steady expression. This lack of reaction was driving Marcus crazy. In his world of martial arts competitions, there was always a response. When he won a match, his opponent showed defeat. When he demonstrated techniques, students showed amazement. When he challenged someone, they either accepted or backed down. But this guard was giving him nothing at all. Marcus's frustration was starting to show in his voice. "This is ridiculous," he said loudly to the crowd. "How can people be impressed by someone who won't even acknowledge that you exist? This isn't discipline, this is weakness." Several people in the crowd began calling out for Marcus to stop. A few tourists told him he was being disrespectful. One elderly British man said firmly, "That's enough, young man. Leave the guard alone." But Marcus ignored all these warnings. He was too committed to his demonstration now. He felt like he had gone too far to stop without proving his point completely. Marcus moved even closer to the guard, now standing less than a foot away from his face. He began speaking in a loud whisper, as if sharing a secret that everyone could hear. "I know you can hear me," he said. "I know you want to respond. But you can't, can you? Because you know I'm right. You know that your fancy uniform and your ceremonial training are no match for real fighting skills." Then Marcus made his biggest mistake yet. He began making striking motions extremely close to the guard's body. His fist stopped just half an inch from the guard's nose. His foot swept within millimeters of the guard's ankle. Each movement was a mock attack that, in a real fight, would have been devastating. "See this?" Marcus said to his camera while demonstrating these near misses. "Perfect accuracy, perfect control. This guard wouldn't even know what hit him if this were real." The crowd was becoming genuinely alarmed now. Several people were shouting for Marcus to stop. Someone was calling for security on their phone. The situation had clearly gone beyond appropriate tourist behavior and was approaching something much more serious. But Marcus was completely caught up in his own performance. He felt like he was having the greatest moment of his martial arts career. All these people were watching him demonstrate his superiority over one of Britain's supposedly elite guards. This would be the video that made him famous around the world. In his excitement, Marcus made a critical error in judgment. He decided that he needed to get some kind of reaction from the guard to make his point complete. Standing directly in front of Sergeant Morrison, Marcus raised his hand and began moving it toward the guard's face, intending to wave it right in front of his eyes. But as his hand got closer, Marcus lost his sense of distance. Instead of stopping just short of the guard's face, his fingers actually brushed against the guard's cheek. The moment of physical contact changed everything. For the first time since Marcus had started his demonstration, Sergeant Morrison's eyes moved. They shifted down to look directly at Marcus. And when Marcus saw those eyes up close, he finally realized his mistake. These were not the eyes of a ceremonial guard or a tourist attraction. These were the eyes of a man who had seen real combat, who had faced actual life-and-death situations, who had training and experience that Marcus could not even imagine. In a calm, steady voice that somehow carried clearly to everyone in the crowd, Sergeant Morrison spoke his first words of the day. "Sir, please step back." The words were polite and professional, but there was something in the tone that made Marcus's stomach drop. This was not the voice of someone who was afraid or uncertain. This was the voice of someone who was giving a warning, and who was prepared to act if that warning was not heeded. But Marcus had come too far to back down now. With dozens of cameras recording and a crowd of people watching, he felt like he could not show any weakness. Instead of stepping back as the guard had requested, Marcus decided to prove his point once and for all. "There we go," he said loudly, turning to his camera with a big smile. "Finally got a reaction. But notice how he asked me to step back instead of stepping forward to face the challenge. That tells you everything you need to know about these guards." Marcus turned back to face the guard and made the decision that would change his life forever. Instead of stepping back, he stepped forward and placed his hand on Sergeant Morrison's shoulder, pushing gently against the red uniform jacket. The moment Marcus made physical contact with the guard's uniform, he crossed the line from harassment into assault. He had just committed a crime against a member of the British Royal Guard, in full view of dozens of witnesses and multiple cameras. And Sergeant Morrison was no longer required to simply stand there and take it. The moment Marcus pushed against Sergeant Morrison's shoulder, everything changed. The crowd went completely silent. The constant chatter of tourists stopped. Even the sounds of London traffic seemed to fade into the background. Everyone could sense that something serious was about to happen. Marcus felt the firm muscle under the red uniform jacket. For just a moment, he realized that this guard was much stronger than he looked. But Marcus had pushed too far to stop now. With cameras recording and people watching, he felt like he had to prove his point completely. "See?" Marcus said loudly to his phone camera, keeping his hand on the guard's shoulder. "He still won't do anything. Even when someone actually touches him, he just stands there. These guards are all for show." But Marcus was wrong. Sergeant Morrison was not just standing there anymore. In less than 3 seconds, everything Marcus thought he knew about fighting was proven completely wrong. Sergeant Morrison stepped out of his ceremonial position for the first time that day. His movement was so smooth and controlled that it looked almost casual. But every motion was precise and purposeful, the result of years of military training in close-quarters combat. First, Sergeant Morrison's left hand came up to grab Marcus's wrist, the one that was pushing against his shoulder. His grip was like a steel trap, much stronger than Marcus expected. Before Marcus could even think about pulling away, the guard's right hand moved to control Marcus's other arm. Marcus tried to pull back, but he was completely controlled now. The guard's grip was unbreakable, and Marcus suddenly realized he could not move his arms at all. Panic started to set in as Marcus understood that he was no longer in control of the situation. "Hey, let go of me," Marcus shouted, trying to sound tough but with fear creeping into his voice. Sergeant Morrison did not respond with words. Instead, he continued his defensive sequence with the calm precision of someone who had done this many times before. While holding Marcus's wrists firmly, the guard stepped slightly to his right and swept his leg behind Marcus's legs. It was a simple move, but executed with perfect timing and leverage. Marcus felt his balance disappear instantly. Marcus tried to use his taekwondo training to recover, but he quickly discovered that tournament fighting had not prepared him for this kind of close-contact grappling. In competitions, there were rules about what techniques could be used and how fighters could engage. This was completely different. As Marcus began to fall backward, Sergeant Morrison released his wrists and placed his right palm firmly against Marcus's chest. It was not a violent strike, but a controlled push using Marcus's own momentum against him. The technique was designed to disable an attacker quickly without causing unnecessary injury. The palm strike hit Marcus right in the solar plexus, the soft area just below the rib cage where many nerves come together. The impact was perfectly placed and timed. Instantly, Marcus felt like he could not breathe. His diaphragm spasmed, making it impossible to get air into his lungs. Marcus's eyes went wide with shock and fear. He had never felt anything like this before. In all his years of martial arts training, in all his tournament fights, no one had ever hit him in a way that made breathing impossible. He tried to gasp for air, but his body would not respond normally. At the same time, the leg sweep completed its work. With no air in his lungs and his balance completely gone, Marcus fell backward onto the stone courtyard in front of the palace gates. The fall was not far, but it was hard and sudden. Marcus's back hit the ground with a solid thud that everyone in the crowd could hear. The entire sequence, from the moment Marcus pushed the guard's shoulder to the moment he hit the ground, took less than 3 seconds. It was so fast that many people in the crowd did not even understand what had happened. One moment Marcus was standing and taunting the guard, and the next moment he was on the ground gasping for breath. Marcus lay on the cold stone, staring up at the sky and trying desperately to breathe. His body was in panic mode, sending signals that he was in danger and needed air immediately. But his diaphragm was still spasming from the precisely placed palm strike, making normal breathing impossible. The crowd erupted in gasps and shouts. People were pointing and talking loudly in many different languages. Some tourists were backing away from the scene, while others were moving closer to get a better view. Phones and cameras continued recording everything that was happening. Marcus tried to sit up, but he was still struggling to breathe properly. Each attempt to get air resulted in short, painful gasps. He had never experienced anything like this before. In tournaments, when someone got hit, they might be hurt or knocked down, but they could always breathe. This was completely different and much more frightening. Looking up from the ground, Marcus saw Sergeant Morrison standing above him. The guard had returned to his ceremonial position, but he was now looking down at Marcus with those same steady, blue eyes. There was no anger in his expression, no satisfaction, no emotion at all. He looked like a professional who had simply done what was necessary. For the first time since arriving in London, Marcus began to understand that he had seriously misjudged the situation. This guard was not a ceremonial figure or a tourist attraction. He was a trained soldier who had just demonstrated real combat skills in the most efficient way possible. As Marcus slowly began to catch his breath, He realized that his phone had flown out of his hand when he fell. It was lying on the stone. Several feet away, its screen cracked from the impact. All his videos and pictures from the morning were probably damaged or lost. But that was the least of his problems now. Other guards were already moving toward the scene, walking quickly but maintaining their professional composure. Palace security. Personnel were also approaching, speaking into radio devices. Marcus could see people in the crowd pointing at him and talking to what looked like police officers. Marcus finally managed to get enough air into his lungs to speak, though his voice was weak and shaky. What just happened?" he gasped, looking up at the guard who had put him on the ground so easily. Sergeant Morrison looked down at him with the same calm expression. When he spoke, his voice was quiet but clear enough for everyone nearby to hear. "You assaulted a member of Her Majesty's Guard," he said simply. "I responded with appropriate force to neutralize the threat and protect myself and others." Marcus could not believe what he was hearing. In his mind, he had just been making a point about martial arts and ceremonial duties. He had not meant to hurt anyone or cause real trouble. But now he was lying on the ground, struggling to breathe, surrounded by security personnel and police officers. The crowd was buzzing with excitement and concern. Some people were checking to see if Marcus was seriously injured. Others were calling for medical help. Many were still recording videos and taking pictures of everything that was happening. Marcus tried to stand up, but his legs were still shaky from the shock of what had just happened. He managed to get to his hands and knees, but standing completely was difficult. His whole body felt weak and uncertain. A police officer knelt down next to Marcus and began asking him questions. "Are you injured, sir? Do you need medical attention? Can you tell me your name and what happened here?" Marcus wanted to explain that this was all a misunderstanding, that he was just demonstrating martial arts and making a point about real fighting versus ceremonial duties. But as he looked around at all the serious faces watching him, he began to realize that no one saw it that way. To everyone else, Marcus looked like a tourist who had harassed and then assaulted a British royal guard. The videos that people had recorded would show him taunting the guard, making threats and then pushing him. They would also show the guard's professional response and Marcus's complete defeat. As Marcus finally managed to stand up with help from the police officer, he looked back at Sergeant Morrison. The guard had returned to his exact position and was once again staring straight ahead as if nothing had happened. But Marcus now understood that this man had shown incredible restraint by using only the minimum force necessary to stop him. Marcus realized that if Sergeant Morrison had wanted to seriously hurt him, he could have done so very easily. The guard's training and experience were far beyond anything Marcus had encountered in his martial arts career. The techniques the guard had used were simple but devastatingly effective, designed for real situations where lives might be at stake. Standing, they're surrounded by police officers and security personnel. With his cracked phone on the ground and dozens of tourists staring at him, Marcus began to understand the full magnitude of his mistake. He had challenged someone who was completely out of his league, and he had been defeated in the most public and humiliating way possible. The martial arts champion who had arrived at Buckingham Palace that morning feeling superior and confident was gone. In his place stood a confused and shaken young man who was about to face serious consequences for his actions. And this was only the beginning of Marcus's problems. The next few minutes felt like hours to Marcus. As he stood on shaky legs, surrounded by police officers and palace security, the reality of his situation began to sink in. The crowd that had been entertained by his martial arts demonstrations was now looking at him with very different expressions. Instead of admiration, he saw shock, disappointment, and embarrassment. A senior police officer approached Marcus. He was an older man with gray hair and many years of experience dealing with difficult tourists. His expression was serious but not unkind as he began to speak. "Sir, I need you to come with me for questioning," the officer said firmly. "You are being detained in connection with an assault on a member of the Royal Guard." Marcus felt his stomach drop even further. The word assault sounded so serious and criminal. In his mind, he had just been demonstrating martial arts and making a point about real fighting. But he was beginning to understand that the law saw things very differently. "Officer, "I think there's been a misunderstanding," Marcus said, his voice still weak from the breathing difficulties he had experienced. "I'm a martial arts instructor from California. I was just showing people the difference between sport fighting and ceremonial duties. I didn't mean to assault anyone." The police officer listened patiently, but his expression did not change. "Sir, we have multiple witnesses and video recordings showing you harassing the guard for an extended period of time, making threats, and then placing your hands on him without permission. That constitutes assault under British law, regardless of your intentions." As the officer spoke, Marcus could see other police personnel collecting evidence. They were talking to witnesses in the crowd, taking statements from people who had watched the entire incident. Several officers were asking tourists to share any videos or photos they had taken. Marcus realized that there would be extensive documentation of everything he had done. Meanwhile, other guards had quietly restored order around the palace. They maintained their professional positions while palace security managed the crowd. The incident was being handled efficiently and calmly, which made Marcus feel even worse about his behavior. These people clearly knew how to deal with difficult situations, and he had been foolish to think he could disrupt their operations. A paramedic approached Marcus to check if he needed medical attention. The man was kind and professional as he examined Marcus for injuries from his fall and checked his breathing. "You took quite a hit to the solar plexus," the paramedic explained. "That area is full of nerves, and when it's struck properly, it can temporarily paralyze your diaphragm. You should be fine now, but let me know if you have any continued difficulty breathing." Marcus nodded, still amazed at how precisely the guard had been able to disable him. In all his years of martial arts training, he had never learned techniques that were so immediately effective with so little apparent effort. As the paramedic finished his examination, Marcus noticed that the crowd was not going away. In fact, more people were arriving as word spread about what had happened. Tourists were pointing at him and talking in excited voices. Many were still taking pictures and videos of him standing with the police officers. Marcus began to realize that this incident was not going to remain private. With so many people recording everything, videos of his confrontation with the guard would likely be shared on social media within hours. The thought made him feel sick to his stomach. A palace. Security supervisor approached the senior police officer. Marcus could hear parts of their conversation, and what he heard made his situation sound even worse. The guard acted with perfect restraint and professionalism, the supervisor was saying. He ignored the harassment for as long as possible, and only responded when physically assaulted. His use of force was minimal and appropriate for the situation. The Sioux police officer nodded and made notes in a small notebook. "What can you tell me about the guard's background and training?" "Sergeant Morrison is one of our most experienced personnel," the supervisor replied. 12 years of military service, including multiple combat deployments with the Royal Marines. He's certified as an instructor in several combat disciplines. The suspect had no idea who he was challenging. Marcus felt his face turn red with embarrassment as he heard this description. Sergeant Morrison was not just a ceremonial guard. He was a highly trained combat veteran with real battlefield experience. Marcus had spent the morning mocking a man who had served his country in some of the most dangerous places in the world. The police officer finished taking the supervisor's statement and returned to Marcus. "Sir, you'll need to come with us to the station for formal questioning. This is a serious matter that will require a thorough investigation." As Marcus was led toward a police vehicle, he caught one last look at Sergeant Morrison. The guard was back in his exact position, standing perfectly still and staring straight ahead. His uniform was immaculate, his posture perfect, his expression completely calm. It was as if the entire incident had never happened. But Marcus knew that for him, nothing would ever be the same. The ride to the police station was quiet and uncomfortable. Marcus sat in the back of the police car, trying to process everything that had happened. Just a few hours ago, he had been excited about visiting London and showing off his martial arts skills. Now he was facing criminal charges in a foreign country. At the police station, Marcus was processed according to standard procedures. His personal belongings were catalogued and stored. His fingerprints and photograph were taken. He was given the opportunity to contact the American embassy and arrange for legal representation. During the formal interview, Marcus tried to explain his side of the story. He talked about his martial arts background and his belief that he was just demonstrating the differences between sport fighting and military training. He insisted that he had not meant to assault anyone or cause serious trouble. But as the interview continued, Marcus began to understand how his actions had appeared to others. The police showed him some of the videos that witnesses had shared. Watching himself from an outside perspective was deeply uncomfortable. In the videos, Marcus looked arrogant and aggressive. His taunting of the guard seemed cruel and disrespectful. His martial arts demonstrations looked like threats rather than educational displays. And when he finally pushed the guard, it clearly appeared to be an unprovoked assault on a man who had been trying to do his job professionally. "I can see how this looks bad," Marcus admitted to the interviewing officer. "But I really didn't understand who I was dealing with. I thought these guards were just for ceremonies and tourism. I had no idea that Sergeant Morrison was a combat veteran." The officer nodded but remained professional. "Ignorance of someone's background does not excuse assault, sir. The law applies equally regardless of whether you knew about the guard's military service." As the hours passed at the police station, Marcus learned more about the potential consequences he was facing. Assault on a member of the Royal Guard was taken very seriously by British authorities. He could face significant fines, possible jail time, and would certainly be banned from all royal properties. But perhaps even worse than the legal consequences was the damage to his reputation. By evening, videos of the incident were already spreading rapidly on social media platforms. People around the world were watching Marcus get knocked down by the British guard he had been taunting. The videos were being shared with titles like "Arrogant American Martial Artist Gets Owned by Royal Guard and Black Belt Learns Hard Lesson from Real Soldier." Comments were pouring in from viewers, and most of them were not supportive of Marcus. Marcus's phone, once it was repaired enough to function, showed dozens of missed calls and messages. His students back in California had seen the videos. His instructor from his original dojo had called. Even local news stations were trying to reach him for interviews. The martial arts demonstration he was supposed to attend that afternoon had to be canceled. The International Martial Arts Federation was not pleased to have one of their invited participants involved in an international incident. Marcus realized that his reputation in the martial arts community was probably destroyed. As Marcus sat in the police station, waiting to learn what would happen next, he had plenty of time to think about his actions. He began to understand that his problem had not been a lack of fighting skill or physical ability. His problem had been a lack of wisdom, respect, and understanding. Sergeant Morrison had not defeated him because of superior martial arts techniques. The guard had defeated him because of superior training, discipline, and experience in real situations. The guard had also shown remarkable restraint by using only the minimum force necessary to stop the threat. Marcus realized that everything he thought he knew about strength, toughness, and fighting had been wrong. Real strength was not about winning tournaments or showing off flashy techniques. Real strength was about discipline, professionalism, and knowing when and how to use force appropriately. For the first time in many years, Marcus felt truly humble. He was beginning to understand that he had a lot to learn about martial arts, about respect, and about himself. But learning those lessons was going to cost him dearly, and the hardest parts of his ordeal were still to come. Marcus spent the night in a holding cell at the London police station. It was a small clean room with basic furniture, but for someone who had never been arrested before, it felt like the worst place in the world. He could not sleep, partly because of the uncomfortable bed, but mostly because his mind would not stop racing with thoughts about what had happened and what might happen next. By morning, the videos of his confrontation with Sergeant Morrison had spread far beyond what Marcus could have imagined. Social media platforms were flooded with clips of the incident, and each platform seemed to have different angles and commentary. The hashtag Royal Guard Knockout was trending worldwide. Marcus's lawyer, provided by the American Embassy, arrived early in the morning to discuss his case. She was a professional woman named Sarah Collins who specialized in helping American citizens with legal troubles in Britain. "Mr. Chen," she said as she sat down across from him in the interview room, "I'm going to be completely honest with you about your situation. You're facing serious charges. and the evidence against you is overwhelming. We have multiple video recordings from different angles, dozens of witness statements, and the testimony of several highly credible members of the Royal Guard. Marcus felt his stomach tighten as she continued. The good news is that you don't appear to have seriously injured the guard, and your own injuries were minor. The bad news is that assault on a member of the Royal Guard is considered a very serious offense in Britain. The authorities take any threat to royal security extremely seriously. Sarah opened a folder and showed Marcus some documents. The Crown Prosecution Service is prepared to offer you a plea agreement. If you plead guilty to assault in public disturbance, you'll receive a fine of £5,000, 6 months of probation, and a permanent ban from all royal properties in the United Kingdom. You'll also be required to issue a public apology. And if I don't take the plea? Marcus asked, though he was afraid to hear the answer. If you choose to fight the charges in court, you risk much more severe penalties. With the video evidence and witness testimony, conviction is almost certain. You could face up to 2 years in prison and much larger fines. As a foreign national, you would also face deportation and a long-term ban from entering the UK. Marcus put his head in his hands. Either way, his life was about to change dramatically and not for the better. While Marcus was meeting with his lawyer, the situation back home in California was getting worse by the hour. His martial arts school had been flooded with phone calls from local news stations, martial arts magazines, and angry parents of his students. His business partner, Janet Kim, was trying to manage the crisis, but it was overwhelming. Students were canceling their memberships, and several parents had come to the school demanding refunds. The videos showing Marcus's defeat had made him look not just arrogant, but incompetent as a martial artist. How could he be so stupid? One parent asked Janet. I send my daughter here to learn self-defense, and now I find out the instructor doesn't even know how to handle himself in a real situation. The martial arts community was also reacting strongly to the videos. Online, forums that usually discuss techniques and training were now focused entirely on Marcus's behavior. Most of the comments were highly critical. This is exactly the kind of arrogance that gives martial arts a bad name, wrote one black belt from Texas. Real martial arts teach humility and respect, not showing off and bullying people who can't fight back. He learned the hard way that there's a big difference between sport karate and real combat, commented a former military instructor. That guard showed perfect technique and restraint. The American guy is lucky he wasn't hurt worse. Marcus's own instructor, Master Park, who had trained him since childhood, was deeply disappointed. When reporters called the original dojo where Marcus had started training, Master Park's statement was brief but devastating. Marcus has forgotten the most important lessons of martial arts. Strength without wisdom is dangerous. Skill without humility is worthless. I am ashamed that one of my former students has behaved this way. Back in London, Marcus decided to accept the plea agreement. He simply could not risk going to prison in a foreign country. The formal proceeding was quick and businesslike. Marcus stood before a British judge and formally admitted his guilt. Mr. Chen, the judge said sternly, your behavior was not only illegal but deeply disrespectful to one of this nation's honored institutions. The Royal Guard serves with dignity and professionalism, and they deserve the respect of all visitors to our country. Your actions showed a complete lack of understanding and maturity. Marcus nodded and quietly said, Yes, Your Honor. I understand, and I'm very sorry for my actions. The judge sentenced him according to the plea agreement, and Marcus was released from custody. But his troubles were far from over. The requirement for a public apology meant that Marcus would have to face the media and acknowledge his mistakes in front of the world. The press conference was held outside the courthouse with dozens of reporters and cameras present. Standing at a podium with his lawyer beside him, Marcus read from a prepared statement. His voice was quiet and shaky, very different from the confident tone he had used when taunting Sergeant Morrison. I want to sincerely apologize for my behavior at Buckingham Palace, he began. I acted with complete disrespect toward Sergeant Morrison and the other members of the Royal Guard. I was arrogant, ignorant, and wrong about everything I said and did. Marcus paused, struggling to continue. I thought I understood what strength and fighting ability meant, but I was completely mistaken. Sergeant Morrison showed me what real discipline and professionalism look like. He used only the minimum force necessary to stop my inappropriate behavior, and he did so with perfect control and restraint. The reporters asked several questions. Most of them focused on what Marcus had learned from the experience and whether he planned to continue teaching martial arts. "I don't know if I should continue teaching," Marcus answered honestly. "I clearly don't understand martial arts as well as I thought I did. I need to go home and seriously reconsider everything I believe about fighting, respect, and what it means to be a martial artist." The flight back to California was the longest trip of Marcus's life. He wore a baseball cap and sunglasses, hoping that other passengers would not recognize him from the videos, but it was impossible to hide completely. Several people on the plane gave him strange looks, and he was sure he heard some passengers whispering about him. When Marcus finally arrived at Los Angeles International Airport, a small group of reporters was waiting for him. He tried to avoid them, but they followed him through the terminal asking questions and taking pictures. "Marcus, do you plan to challenge any more Royal Guards? Are you embarrassed by how easily you were defeated? What do you want to say to your students who saw you get knocked out?" Marcus did not answer any of their questions. He just wanted to get home and try to figure out how to rebuild his life. But when Marcus arrived at his apartment, he found more bad news waiting for him. His landlord had left a message saying that other tenants were complaining about the media attention and negative publicity. His martial arts school had lost more than half of its students while he was in London. Several sponsors who had supported his competition career were canceling their agreements. Most painfully, Marcus found a letter from the International Martial Arts Federation formally revoking his membership and banning him from all sanctioned competitions and demonstrations. "Your behavior in London was completely contrary to the values and principles that martial arts represent," the letter stated. "We cannot have someone who showed such disrespect and poor judgment representing our organization." Sitting alone in his apartment surrounded by trophies and certificates that suddenly seemed meaningless, Marcus realized that his old life was completely over. Everything he had worked for and built over the past 20 years had been destroyed by a few minutes of arrogance and stupidity in front of Buckingham Palace. But as devastating as these consequences were, Marcus was beginning to understand that they were also necessary. He had been living with a false understanding of what martial arts really meant. He had confused winning tournaments with being a true martial artist. He had mistaken physical techniques for wisdom and character. The man who had defeated him so easily, Sergeant Morrison, had not been trying to humiliate him or show off his superior skills. The guard had simply done his job with professionalism and restraint. That was what real strength looked like. Marcus knew that he faced a long and difficult journey ahead. He would have to rebuild not just his career and reputation, but his entire understanding of martial arts and himself. It would not be easy, and there was no guarantee that he would succeed. But for the first time in many years, Marcus was ready to approach that challenge with genuine humility instead of arrogance. And that at least was a beginning. 6 months after the incident at Buckingham Palace, Marcus Chen was a very different person. He lived in a small studio apartment instead of his former luxury condo. He worked part-time at a local gym, teaching basic fitness classes to pay his bills. His martial arts school was closed, his competition career was over, and his dreams of fame and recognition were gone. But something unexpected had happened during those difficult months. As Marcus lost everything he thought was important, he began to discover what actually mattered. It started 3 weeks after he returned from London, when Marcus received an unexpected visitor at his apartment. Master Park, his childhood instructor, knocked on his door one evening. Marcus had not seen his old teacher since before the London incident, and he was afraid of what the elderly man might say. "Master Park," Marcus said quietly, bowing respectfully, "I'm so sorry for the shame I brought on your teaching." The old man looked at Marcus carefully. Master Park had been teaching martial arts for over 40 years, and he had seen many students struggle with pride and ego over the decades. But he had also seen students learn from their mistakes and become better people. "Marcus," Master Park said in his gentle but firm voice, "what you did in London was foolish and disrespectful. But shame is only useful if it teaches you something. What have you learned? Marcus invited his old teacher inside and they sat together in the small apartment. For the first time since he was a child, Marcus listened to Master Park with complete attention and humility. I learned that I knew nothing about real martial arts, Marcus said. I thought winning tournaments made me a great fighter, but I was just good at one specific sport. I thought flashy techniques meant I was strong, but I had no real understanding of combat or discipline. Master Park nodded. And what else? Marcus thought carefully before answering. I learned that respect and humility are more important than any technique. That guard in London could have seriously hurt me, but he only used enough force to stop me. He showed me what real control looks like. The Royal Guard you challenged, Master Park said. He understood something you did not. Martial arts are not about proving you are better than others. They are about becoming better than you were yesterday. Over the following weeks, Master Park began visiting Marcus regularly. But instead of teaching him fighting techniques, the old master focused on meditation, philosophy, and the history of martial arts. Marcus learned about ancient warriors who valued honor above victory, and about the true meaning of strength. A truly strong person does not need to prove their strength to others, Master Park explained during one of their sessions. They prove it to themselves by showing restraint, wisdom, and respect. Marcus also began reading books about military history and learning about soldiers like Sergeant Morrison. He discovered stories of combat veterans who had served in dangerous places around the world, putting their lives at risk to protect others. He began to understand the difference between someone who fights for sport and someone who fights to serve something greater than themselves. As the months passed, Marcus started volunteering at a local community center, teaching basic self-defense to elderly people and single mothers. These students were not interested in winning trophies or impressing anyone. They just wanted to feel safer and more confident. Teaching them reminded Marcus why he had originally fallen in love with martial arts. One evening, while Marcus was leading a self-defense class for senior citizens, a local news reporter happened to visit the community center for a different story. She recognized Marcus from the viral videos and asked if she could interview him. Marcus was hesitant at first, but he decided that sharing his story might help others avoid making similar mistakes. 6 months ago, I thought I was a martial arts expert, Marcus told the reporter. But I was really just an arrogant young man who had forgotten the most important lessons my teachers tried to give me. The interview was broadcast on local television and later shared online. But this time, the response was very different from the mockery and criticism that had followed the London videos. Many people were impressed by Marcus's honesty and humility. Martial arts instructors from around the country reached out to share their own stories of learning difficult lessons. Some of Marcus's former students even contacted him to say they respected his willingness to admit his mistakes and change his approach. It takes real courage to face your failures so publicly, wrote one martial arts master from New York. Your story is a valuable reminder for all of us who teach and train. Marcus also received an unexpected letter from Britain. It was from a military veterans organization that had seen his interview. They wrote to tell him that many combat veterans appreciated his acknowledgement of Sergeant Morrison's professionalism and restraint. Your incident at Buckingham Palace could have ended much worse if the guard had not been so well trained and disciplined, the letter stated. We are glad you have learned to understand and respect the difference between sport fighting and real military service. Most surprisingly, Marcus received a brief message through official channels from Sergeant Morrison himself. The guard's message was simple but meaningful. Respect is earned through actions, not words. You are on the right path now. By the end of his 6-month probation period, Marcus had been transformed from an arrogant martial arts champion into a humble teacher who understood the true values of his discipline. He reopened his school, but with a completely different approach. Instead of focusing on competition and winning, Marcus's new school emphasized character development, respect, and practical self-defense. He required all his students to volunteer in their community and to study the philosophy behind martial arts, not just the physical techniques. His classes were smaller now, but the students were more dedicated and serious about learning. Parents appreciated that their children were learning discipline and respect along with physical skills. Adult students valued the emphasis on real-world applications rather than tournament techniques. Marcus also established a scholarship program for military veterans who wanted to study martial arts. He partnered with local veteran organizations to provide free classes for former service members who were dealing with injuries or adjustment difficulties. "I can never undo what I did in London," Marcus told his new students during their first class. "But I can make sure that everyone I teach understands the true meaning of martial arts. It's not about being better than other people. It's about being the best version of yourself." The story of Marcus's transformation spread throughout the martial arts community and became a cautionary tale that instructors shared with their students. Videos of his downfall at Buckingham Palace were often shown alongside his later interviews about humility and respect. "This is what happens when ego becomes more important than wisdom," teachers would say. But this is also what redemption looks like when someone is truly willing to change. Marcus never returned to competition fighting, and he never again claimed to be superior to anyone. He spent his days teaching practical skills to ordinary people who wanted to protect themselves and their families. He found more satisfaction in helping a frightened woman feel confident walking to her car at night than he had ever found in winning tournaments. Years later, when journalists asked Marcus about his experience in London, he always gave the same answer: "Sergeant Morrison taught me the most important martial arts lesson of my life. Real strength is about knowing when and how to use your power, not about proving how powerful you are." The incident that had destroyed Marcus's old life had ultimately given him something much more valuable: true understanding of what it meant to be a martial artist. He had learned that discipline, respect, and service to others were worth more than all the trophies and recognition in the world. And in teaching others those same lessons, Marcus found a purpose that was far more meaningful than anything he had achieved in his previous life. The man who had once been defeated by a royal guard had finally learned how to truly win.